I don't understand how some people can seriously justify a fraudster who has been cheating on his spouse and his entire family for many months. I don't understand this. Unfortunately, my wife turned out to be a real snake in the world of traitors, and I had to confront her in order not to lose my entire family. The phone rang loudly next to the sleeping Terry Gilson. He jolted awake. "What the hell?" he muttered. The phone rang again. He picked up the receiver. "Hello," he managed in a gravelly low cough. "Mr. Gilson?" "Yeah." "This is Sergeant Preston from the Yukon County Police Department." "Can I speak to Mrs. Turvey, please?" commanded the authoritative voice in Gilson's ear. "Who is this?" "Mr. Gilson, please put Mrs. Turvey on. This is a police emergency." The tone was clear and insistent. "One moment," Gilson mumbled in response. He handed the phone to the sleepy woman lying next to him. "It's for you. It's the police," he said simply. "What?" She snatched the phone out of his hands. "Hello? Good morning, my dear unfaithful wife," an overly cheerful voice rang out. "I hope you slept well after you and your lover finished last night." "Oh my God, Mick. Is that you, Mick?" "Don't doubt it, honey. I'm calling to give you some information that you might need." Mick, please," she begged. "First of all, you can throw away your house key. It won't work anymore. Oh, and I changed the garage door code too. Mick, please." "It's not what you think," she cried. "You don't know what I think, Sheila. But I'm not calling to discuss this. I'm just calling to tell you that your credit cards are useless now, and you can pick up your clothes and toiletries from the plastic containers behind the side gate at any time." His voice turned icy. No, Mick, please, don't do this, please," his wife begged desperately. "It's too late, my sweet ones, it's already done." "But where will I go?" She was crying. "Well, in the immortal words of Rhett Butler, and to be honest, my dear, I don't give a damn about it." In anger, he hung up the phone. I had initiated the process several weeks prior, but this morning marked the critical moment. If I hadn't been certain she was sleeping in Gilson's room, I wouldn't have attempted this stunt. I was taken aback by how easily it worked and how empty this moment felt. A cuckold's victory, I thought. Too little, too late. Let me explain my situation. My name is Michael Mick Turvey. I'm 43 years old and work as a sales representative for a building materials distributor. I've been with the same company for over 20 years. I married Sheila Pratt almost exactly 20 years ago. We were supposed to celebrate our 20th anniversary next month. I had thought it was a good marriage, having given us 2 wonderful children. Our first, Angela, my angel, was born a year and a half after we got married, and our son Ben was born 2 years later. I loved my wife and children unconditionally. They were my reason for being. No man could have been prouder of his family than I was. We lived in a modest home that had everything a family could want. It was a 3-bedroom split level, our second home purchase bought 4 years ago. It wasn't new, but we had worked on updating it and making it our own. First, a new kitchen. Then a finished basement with a workshop for me and a large family room for the kids' entertainment. A garage where we actually parked our cars, followed by new furniture for the living and dining rooms. I thought we had the perfect life. I met Sheila when we were both in the 11th grade of high school. She was an attractive blonde with a nice figure, so it was hard not to notice her. Although she tried out for cheerleader, she didn't make the team. I played wide receiver on the football team and thought we could be a good match. I asked her out on a date right after school started in the fall, and she agreed. We dated for several months, and during that time, Sheila blossomed into a very attractive young woman. Her body developed in a way that caught the attention of many, not just me. I assumed we were in a steady relationship, but I never actually confirmed it with Sheila. Before I knew it, our quarterback, Terry Gilson, asked her out, and she said yes. I was confused and hurt because I thought we were a couple, but clearly I was mistaken. Terry was the star of our team. He was a talented senior with a strong arm and an intense will to win, unlike anything I'd ever seen. As a quarterback, he was both a coach's dream and nightmare. He had immense talent and a fearless attitude, but he couldn't follow orders. Everyone on the team knew that Terry wasn't a team player. Terry was all about Terry. Our team finished with a winning score that season, but I wondered how much better we could have played if Terry had stuck to the coach's script instead of coming up with it along the way. Despite all his talent, he was undisciplined and very frustrating to all of us who lived in his shadow. Terry often boasted that he had slept with every cheerleader at least once. I was grateful to Sheila for not being a cheerleader, but I wasn't sure it would protect her. There was no point in me being mad at Gilson. He was what he was, a tireless womanizer. Nothing personal, just intimacy. I was upset that Sheila had fallen for him, but I knew there was nothing I could do about it. Terry would be gone next year, and Sheila and I would still be here. Maybe there was still a chance for me. It didn't happen. I started dating Marilyn Ehrlicher. Since our school's seating was usually alphabetical, Marilyn often sat behind me and had me in her sights. Marilyn was a nice girl, but she wasn't what I was looking for. I wanted something more exciting, but that was too much to expect from Miss Ehrlicher. We got along fine, and I think she was impressed that a football player was interested in her, but that was about it. In the spring, I began looking for someone else. Meanwhile, Gilson had dumped Sheila for another girl, making her available once again. I considered it, but after how she had left me, I decided to ignore her. By the end of the year, she had found someone else, and I was left out once again. 12th grade was different. Roger Davidson had taken over as quarterback on our team, and he proved to be everything Terry Gilson was not. He was a leader and a true team player. He sought us out to determine who could best do what. It crossed my mind more than once that this guy was coaching material. He understood what it took to win and how to get the most out of the team. The outcome was fantastic. I was catching passes better than ever before, and we were consistently winning. When Roger entered the huddle, everyone fell silent as he called the play and ensured everyone knew the snap count. This was all new to me, and I loved it. I kept avoiding Sheila, still nursing my wounded pride from the Gilson incident. It didn't surprise me when Roger started dating her. Despite his talent and leadership, he was a quiet guy who was hard not to like. In a strange way, I felt good about them. If I couldn't be with her, Roger was my next best choice. I suppose she felt the same. Sheila wasn't the smartest girl in school. In fact, she barely passed with a C average and, like many of her classmates, went straight into the workforce after graduation. She never planned to go to college, likely aware of her limitations. She got a job as a bank teller at the shopping center. After graduation, I lost touch with her. I was headed to college, dreaming of playing football, drinking beer with the guys, and dating only the prettiest girls who would be eager to be with a football hero. By Christmas, reality had set in. I was failing 3 classes, and while I'd enjoyed every minute on the football field, the rest of the college experience was far less enjoyable. There were no girls lining up to date me. The beer was downtown and too expensive for my limited budget. Classes were tough, and I struggled to understand that my learning was entirely my responsibility. There was no one to monitor my attendance or ensure I completed my assignments. It was a completely different world. The grades posted at the end of the term were disheartening. I was in danger of failing. I told myself, no football and no girlfriends next semester. I might as well get serious. It wasn't easy. It was a whole new lifestyle for me. It was a struggle. I made it through, but just barely. With 1 year of college behind me, I wondered if this was what I wanted to do for the next 3 years. Since I was questioning it, the answer seemed clear. No. I found a job in an office in the city. Every morning I took the bus, worked for 9 hours, then took the bus back home. Within a few months, I knew this couldn't be my future. I needed something more. I stuck it out for almost 2 years, but was always looking for something better. If you had asked me what my career would be when I graduated from high school, I wouldn't have had a clue. I certainly wouldn't have considered sales. My image of a salesman was someone going door to door selling brushes, kitchenware, or magazines. That definitely wasn't me. I gained a new perspective when I understood what industrial sales entailed. It involved knowing your product thoroughly, demonstrating that it was as good as, if not better than, the one the customers were currently using, and persuading them to purchase it. What excited me even more was the technical aspect. I quickly realized that sales was about strategy, identifying what you had that the customer needed and why they would want to buy it from you. I applied for a transfer to one of the operational branches and secured a position at the sales desk, an indoor job. It was a beginning, and the more I observed, the more certain I became that this was the career I wanted. I started working without a car and still living at home. Even after moving to the operational branch, nothing changed. I was a beginner with a modest salary, commuting by bus to and from work. When I received my first paycheck, I decided it was time to open a bank account. Until then, I had been living from paycheck to paycheck, and I needed to change that. I chose a bank near my bus stop for convenience and walked in. When I approached the customer service desk, I stopped in my tracks. The young woman who would soon assist me was Sheila Pratt. I was a bit flustered initially, but with a few people ahead of me, I managed to compose myself and think about what I wanted to say. It had been 3 years since I last saw her, but as I observed her, she was just as charming as I remembered. Soon enough, Sheila finished helping the customers ahead of me, and then it was my turn. "Hi, Sheila," I greeted as I approached. She seemed surprised to see me in line. "Hi, Mick," she responded after a brief pause. How can I assist you today?" "I'd like to open an account. I need to deposit my paycheck." Oh, sure. Let me get someone to help you," she said with a smile. "Yeah, thanks. It's nice to see you again," I replied softly. "Yeah, it's good to see you too." Her smile seemed genuine, I thought. A week later, I returned to the bank to pick up my newly printed checks and once again saw Sheila. This time she was walking around, presumably delivering mail. As I waited in line, I watched her, wondering about her life. There was only one way to find out. That marked the beginning of our reconnection, and after a few dates, we found ourselves right back where we started. At 21, I was embarking on what I hoped would be a promising career, while Sheila was searching for a life partner. I proposed the following spring, and she accepted. A year later, in May, we were married, both eagerly looking forward to our future. 18 months after our wedding, Angela was born. She became Daddy's girl from the moment she arrived. When she was upset or crying as a child, I would pick her up, and she would calm down, smile at me, and everything would be all right again. Though I had always imagined having a son, Angie was more wonderful than I could have imagined. 2 years later, our son Ben was born, and I couldn't have been happier as a father. Sheila was Ben's special parent, while Angela remained closest to me. It felt like a perfect family. Sheila often expressed the same sentiment, content with our life together. Though we had our occasional challenges, they were fleeting, and I considered myself incredibly fortunate. A beautiful wife and 2 amazing children. What more could I ask for? Shortly after Angela's birth, I was given a new sales territory, and I was ecstatic. I excelled in my new role, and within a few years, my income nearly doubled from when I had started at Polar. With success came more success, and soon I was earning far beyond what I had initially anticipated. 5 years into our marriage, we were able to purchase our first home, a modest bungalow that became entirely ours. Sheila meticulously decorated it, poring over magazines for ideas. Angela and Ben also had their say, but it was Sheila's touch that brought the decor and colors together. I could only stand back in awe, marveling at how our family had come together so beautifully. We marked our 10th anniversary in that very house, with over 30 guests attending our celebration. I took pride in my achievements, but more so in my family. Our children were excelling in school and well-behaved. My wife excelled as a homemaker and mother, Both sets of parents adored us. What more could I ask for? When Angie turned 14, she started her menstrual cycles. Initially, Sheila helped her understand and manage it. Everything seemed fine at first, but after a few weeks I noticed a change. Angie didn't seem as close to her mother as before. It wasn't overt, but being close to my daughter I noticed. I couldn't pinpoint the reason for this change, and discussing it with Sheila was frustrating. She didn't want to acknowledge the change, dismissing it as my male inability to understand female psychology. Despite my concern, since it didn't affect the rest of the family, I let it be. Ben always seemed balanced. He had a strong bond with his mother, and while I loved him as much as Angie, I knew he would turn to Sheila first for serious issues. This didn't bother me. In every family there are these alliances which should be recognized and respected. I continued to advance in sales due to my achievements, although I realized sales management might not be my true calling. Still, I hoped to be considered for such an opportunity. Having the most productive and profitable territory, I wondered what was needed to move up. It dawned on me that a vacancy would have to open up first. Not long after Angie started high school, Sheila approached me about returning to work. After 16 years as a stay-at-home soccer mom, she wanted something more than household chores. I couldn't find any reason to object, but I asked her to ensure her choice wouldn't disrupt the children's lives or our leisure time. She assured me it wouldn't. After a couple of months searching, she found a part-time job as a receptionist at a car dealership, working mornings from 9 to 1, Monday to Saturday. Since I played golf on Saturday mornings, the schedule worked well. Though it didn't pay much, it supplemented our income and could be saved for vacations. Her satisfaction was all that mattered to me. Our lives continued on for another couple of years until one day Sheila returned home with unsettling news. "Guess what, Mick?" she began with evident hesitation. "What is it?" "Terry Gilson's back in town," she revealed, watching my reaction carefully. "Oh, what brought him back?" "His dad's a big-shot businessman. Terry's now the assistant general manager at his dad's dealership," she explained, not quite as composed as she'd hoped. "Which dealership is that?" I inquired, already knowing the answer. "Well, ours. I mean where I work, Century Ford," she stumbled. "So, what does this mean for you?" I asked, sensing there was more to the story. "I've been asked to take the job as his assistant," she finally admitted. Wow. That's a big move, from part-time receptionist to assistant to the assistant general manager. "I didn't realize they had such a large team," I remarked, my tone laced with sarcasm. "You don't sound pleased," she observed. "I'm not. You dated Gilson. I know what kind of guy he is. He used to boast about his conquests. Is your name still on his list?" It was a low blow, and I regretted saying it immediately. "That's a horrible thing to imply. Do you not trust me?" she demanded. "I don't trust him," I clarified quickly. Her face flushed with anger, and for the first time in a long while she was visibly furious. "Mick, take that back. You have no right to accuse me of anything. And you've just insinuated that I'm untrustworthy," she said sharply. "I never said that. I simply said, I don't trust him." "We both know what kind of person he is. It's been 20 years. But people like him don't change," I asserted firmly. "Consider this," I pressed on. "How does a part-time receptionist leap to becoming the assistant to the boss's son in one move?" "I'm genuinely curious," I demanded. "I got there because I have the skills for the job," she retorted. "Terry recognized my abilities. Or are you suggesting I'm incapable?" she challenged. "I couldn't say. I don't work there. But I do know this smells like a classic Gilson maneuver." "He's maneuvering you, and you need to tread carefully," I warned, standing directly in front of her. I hoped she understood the gravity of my concerns about Terry Gilson's intentions. "Jealousy," she jeered. "That's what this is about. You don't want me to succeed because it reflects poorly on you." The argument was going nowhere and she wasn't listening. I let out a deep sigh, turned, and headed down to the basement for a cold beer and some reflection. I had no illusions about Gilson's intentions. He saw an attractive woman and figured he could win her over effortlessly. What did it matter if she was married? Perhaps he remembered me from high school and didn't see me as much of an obstacle. I resolved to keep a close watch on the situation. It took a week before the tension in the house eased. Unfortunately, our children had overheard Sheila and me arguing. We had both raised our voices. As things settled, Angie came to find me when I was alone. "Hey, Dad, you doing all right?" "Hi, Angie. Yeah, I'm okay." I fibbed. "I couldn't help hearing the argument," she admitted. "Who's this Gilson guy?" "Someone your mom dated in high school. He was our quarterback and I played with him for a bit. I was trying to warn your mom. He's not a good guy and doesn't respect women much," I said sadly. "I don't think Mom appreciated hearing that," she said softly. "No, I guess not. She sees this as a big opportunity and a significant job. She might go from part-time to full-time, so there could be changes in our routine," I speculated. "It's okay, Dad. I can help with meals and laundry and stuff. Mom will probably make a lot more money now, right?" "I suppose so. We didn't really talk about that. I'll just have to wait and see, Angie." "I hope this doesn't turn out to be a mistake for your mom," I said, putting my arm around her and drawing her close. "I just hope everything works out okay." As I suspected, it turned out to be a full-time position with a salary more than double what she had previously earned. So in that respect, she was fairly compensated for her role. I harbored some doubts about her job, though. When I delicately inquired about Sheila's daily activities, her answers were vague, but it seemed her work lacked structure. From what I gathered, it sounded like she was expected to respond promptly whenever Gilson called. Over time, my concerns about her job diminished. Sheila left for work just before 9 each morning and returned home shortly after 5 in the afternoon, without overtime or special assignments, just a regular job. Consequently, we didn't need to make many sacrifices. My own work hours were longer, often leaving home by 7 and returning after 6 before anyone else was up. This meant our family time was mostly confined to evenings and weekends. Our bedtime relationship was no different. Sheila was quite passive in the bedroom. We did intimacy a few times a week, but it was pretty traditional. I tried to offer her role-playing games and other different things, but she wasn't interested. Since we made love twice a week, I didn't complain. When Gilson appeared, I noticed any changes in our bed life, but everything remained the same. I've always made an effort to be on good terms with our neighbors. It just makes life simpler. The McDonald's next to us were older and quiet. Their kids were grown up and gone, so we didn't have much in common. We were polite and helped each other out when needed, but we weren't close. On the other side, the Romanos were a different story. Their children were younger, and Angie often babysat for them when we first moved in. We clicked with them really well, often having backyard barbecues and card parties at each other's homes. Jimmy and Felicia became our closest friends. Jimmy worked as an accountant at the town's GM dealership. I had forgotten about that until he brought home a loaner van with the dealership's logo plastered on it. One Sunday morning, I saw Jimmy trimming the lawn and went over to chat. "Hey Jimmy, how's it going?" I started. Same old. Can't complain," he grinned. "Yeah, me too. Say, I've got a question for you," I said casually. "Shoot." "You work at the dealership. Does the general manager usually have an assistant, like an assistant general manager?" "Yeah, in bigger places there's usually someone to step in when the boss isn't around." "Would that assistant have their own assistant, like a girl Friday or something?" He gave me a strange look, then seemed to realize something and grew uncomfortable. Not usually," he finally said. "I didn't think so," I nodded. "Thanks, Jimmy." I turned to head back home. My suspicions confirmed. "Mick, he called out. I stopped and turned as he approached. I know what you're thinking. I know a few people there. Let me see what I can find out quietly, he said in a low voice. I looked at him for a moment, then nodded. Thanks again. After all this time, I found myself wondering why I had even asked Jimmy that question. Perhaps I feared what his answer might reveal. There hadn't been any indication of anything awry, yet the thought persisted. Jimmy knew Sheila's employer and her job title, but he had never mentioned it to either of us. I had unexpectedly put him on the spot, and he had responded as any good friend would. Despite Sheila no longer working on Saturday mornings, I continued my early golf routine. The Saturday after my conversation with Jimmy arrived chilly and breezy, though thankfully rain held off. Playing with our usual foursome, none of us performed particularly well amidst the biting wind that added to our discomfort. We were all relieved to finish the round and retreat to the clubhouse. As usual, we gathered at the 19th hole after changing, where tradition dictated that the winners bought drinks for the losers. Today, my partner and I were footing the bill. As I entered the lounge, I spotted Jimmy Romano seated alone near the TV, nursing a drink. I approached him with a smile. I didn't know you played golf, I remarked. I don't. You know me better than that, he chuckled. What brings you here? I asked, sensing the seriousness in his demeanor. I wanted to talk to you. In private, he replied, his tone sobering. I nodded, already suspecting the topic. Let me settle up with the winners. I'll be right back, I assured him. It didn't take long to buy drinks and explain I needed a moment. Within 5 minutes, I returned to Jimmy's table. So I assume you've heard something about my query the other day, I said, leaning back. Yeah, I wish I had better news, Mick, I really do, he sighed, avoiding eye contact. Give it to me straight, Jimmy. I can handle it, I said confidently, masking my uncertainty. Well, Gilson must be the most disliked guy at that dealership. The people I spoke to see him as dead weight, completely useless. He irritates everyone he encounters and contributes nothing. No one wants him to do anything because he's bound to mess it up, which apparently he's already done more than once. Jimmy paused, taking a sip from his drink. Doesn't surprise me, I replied calmly. So, where does Sheila fit into all this? He gave me a pained look, one of the most hangdog expressions I'd ever seen from him. It was clear he was reluctant to reveal what he knew. Sheila spends most of her day in his office, occasionally typing a letter or fetching him coffee. She moves quickly only when Gilson Sr. shows up. Then she disappears into the parts department or the employee lounge. Once he leaves, everything returns to normal, Jimmy recounted. Sounds like old man Gilson is clueless about Sheila and her secret role, I muttered. Jimmy simply nodded, hesitating as if there was more to say. Come on, Jimmy, just tell me. I won't bite, I assured him. They go out to lunch together about twice a week. They leave just before noon and don't return until 2 or 2:30, he revealed. Since she started working there? I asked, suddenly alert. No, it started a few months in, he suggested. One of our smart-mouthed sales guys followed them one day. They went to the Carlton Inn over on Banner Road. That's quite a trek for lunch, I observed. Mick, the Carlton doesn't even have a restaurant, he said quietly. I felt a tightening inside me, rendering me immobile. My breath escaped slowly as I struggled to organize my thoughts. Even though I had anticipated this might happen, I wasn't prepared. It's hard to say how long it took before my mind cleared enough to think straight. I'm sorry, Mick, he began, his voice trailing off. I understand, I managed to croak out. I didn't want to hear it either. Later, I shared a drink with Jimmy, reminiscing about the joyful times our families had shared. Despite the happy memories, it felt like we were bidding farewell in some way. We both seemed to realize that things would never be the same. I felt a sharp pang in my stomach, a painful realization Driving home, I braced myself to confront Sheila, unsure how to handle this revelation. I had been oddly composed with Jimmy, which struck me as strange given the gravity of the news. I tried to imagine scenarios where their lunches at the Carlton were innocent. But, deep down, I knew the truth matched appearances. I didn't start feeling truly angry until I was halfway home from the golf club. My mind had been overwhelmed with countless thoughts, emotions swirling until it crystallized into one bitter realization. She had betrayed me, repeatedly. Despite knowing the possibility, I had been made a fool of without a hint of remorse from her. Day after day, she had cuckolded me. It was at that moment that my anger began to build. I pride myself on being a rational thinker, not one to act impulsively. A few blocks from home, I pulled over knowing I wasn't ready to face Sheila. Confrontation might not be the wisest choice. I was certain it wasn't. If this had been a one-time mistake, perhaps we could move past it. But it wasn't. It had been going on for a year, concealed behind Sheila's facade of a happy wife and mother. It was a profound deception. Sitting in my car, engine running, I resolved that this called for a calculated retaliation. I would maintain outward normalcy, but come Monday, I would initiate steps to end this charade and seek retribution. I was determined to inflict as much damage as legally possible upon Terry Gilson and Sheila Pratt-Turvey. This would be done meticulously and within the bounds of the law, but I would ensure they both paid dearly. I didn't start to feel enraged until I was halfway home from the golf club. My mind had been racing with countless thoughts, and my emotions were in turmoil until they crystallized into one bitter realization. She had betrayed me repeatedly. Despite knowing the possibility existed, I was foolish to trust her. She made me a fool without a shred of remorse. Day after day, she cuckolded me. It was then that the anger began to simmer. I pride myself on being a rational thinker, not given to impulsive actions. I parked at the curb a few blocks from home because I knew I couldn't face Sheila in my current state. Confrontation might not be wise. Probably wasn't, in fact. If it had been a one-time mistake, maybe I could forgive and move on. But it wasn't. It had been going on for a year, by the sounds of it. All the while, Sheila played the role of a contented wife and mother. The deception was profound. Sitting in my idling car, I resolved that this called for a calculated response. I would maintain outward normality, but come Monday, I would initiate steps to end this charade and seek retribution. I was resolved to inflict as much damage as I could, legally and by the book, upon Terry Gilson and Sheila Pratt-Turvey. They would pay for their betrayal. The remainder of the weekend was characterized by my meticulous display of courtesy. I held my emotions tightly in check, ensuring that none of my anger or frustration spilled over onto my family. I planned to unleash those feelings once I had all the necessary information. I impatiently watched the hours tick by until Monday morning arrived. When Monday finally dawned, I woke earlier than usual and left the house well before 7. I knew I had several hours before I could start addressing my issues, but escaping the house that morning was my priority. I anticipated my sales manager, Larry Coleman, would already be at the office, so I headed there to discuss taking time off for my issue. Our conversation lasted over 30 minutes. As I explained my request for leave, I sensed he understood the situation regarding my family, and thankfully, he was supportive and agreed to my request. Larry was a decent person, and I appreciated working with him. Shortly after 9 that morning, I called David Mornay, our family lawyer, seeking advice on a family matter. Knowing it wasn't his area of expertise, I wasn't surprised when he referred me to Lydia Pankratz. Although I had only briefly met Lydia a couple of times, I knew she was an excellent divorce lawyer. Her services would likely be costly, but at that moment, expense was the least of my concerns. I had a late afternoon appointment with Lydia. Knowing I would be delayed, I called home to leave a message. To my surprise, Angie answered. "Hey, Angie, why are you home?" I asked. "Teacher Development Day," she replied sarcastically. "They always schedule those on Fridays or Mondays." Yeah, noticed that too. Listen, I have an appointment later today and I won't be back until around 7, I think. Can you let Mom know? Sure, Dad. By the way, are you okay? She asked curiously. Yeah, I'm fine. Why do you ask? I don't know. You seemed off this weekend. You're not sick or anything, right? Nope, I lied. I'm fine. Must be your overactive imagination, I chuckled. After we hung up, I wondered if Sheila had also noticed my odd behavior. She hadn't mentioned anything, but maybe she was being cautious. I'd have to be careful not to reveal too much too soon. The meeting with Lydia was surprising on several levels. Firstly, in a divorce, Sheila would get half of everything regardless of the reason. The silver lining was that given her income, I likely wouldn't have to pay alimony unless I could prove infidelity. Considering her reckless actions, I doubted it would be hard to gather evidence. As far as the children were concerned, I would need to prove abuse, neglect, or another serious crime to gain custody. In this jurisdiction, custody was typically awarded to the mother. Angie, at 18, could decide for herself, but Ben, just 16, would likely remain with his mother for nearly 2 more years. I wasn't comfortable with that, but Lydia indicated it would be hard to change. That's just how the system operated. That's when things became more intriguing. Lydia knew I was determined to hold Sheila and Gilson accountable, and she offered assistance. Since Gilson was her boss, she suggested suing both him and his employer as co-defendants in the divorce. Given that many were aware of their misconduct and did nothing, Lydia proposed a substantial monetary claim against them. Importantly, none of this money would benefit Sheila. Lydia committed to researching Century Ford and initiating divorce proceedings. The grounds for divorce were up to me at this stage, whether it would be irreconcilable differences or infidelity. Lydia suggested that given the predictability of their affairs, obtaining photographic evidence wouldn't be too challenging or costly to strengthen the case. I said I would consider it. When I got home that evening, Sheila greeted me cheerfully, mentioning dinner was in the oven and she had poured a glass of wine for me. I found her behavior unusual and became suspicious. After changing and freshening up upstairs, I joined her at the table where she too had a glass of wine. I have some exciting news, Mick, she said with a wide smile. Oh? I've been invited to the Regional Dealer Convention next month in Marysville, she announced proudly. Really? Just you? I asked, already anticipating the answer. Well, no. Terry and Kurt Jenkins will be going too, she replied nervously. I see. And how long does this convention last? 3 days, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. I'll be back on Sunday, she answered, her nervousness evident. Sounds like you're looking forward to it, I remarked. Yes, it'll be my first convention. I'm sure I'll learn a lot, she said, suddenly enthusiastic again. Yes, I'm sure you will, I replied, injecting a touch of sarcasm. As I processed my thoughts, I began to realize this might be the opportunity I'd been waiting for. She seemed to be setting herself up to be caught. Then, it's all right with you? She asked tentatively. Yes, dear, it's all right with me. I trust you. I know you wouldn't do anything inappropriate, I said with a straight face. I noticed a brief flush on her face before she stood up, leaned over the table, and kissed me. Thank you, Mick. I finished my dinner in silence, and Sheila retired to the living room to watch some pointless TV show. It seemed strange to me that I felt neither upset nor angry, just numb. I just let my wife leave town for 3 days to be with a man I despised, but I didn't feel anything. The next 2 days passed without incident, but I was busy only with work. My mind was in a chaos of thoughts about what would happen next. I couldn't stop thinking about Ben and Angie. How would they react if I talked to their mother? Will they take offense at me? I tried my best to find a way to shield them from the consequences, except to completely abandon my plans and let Sheila continue in the same spirit. But deep down, I knew that this was not the way out. On Thursday morning, Lydia called my office and asked for a meeting in the afternoon. We agreed on 3 o'clock, and I arrived early to tell her the latest news and get things moving. I've made a few decisions. Lydia. Something interesting happened on Monday. Sheila mentioned that she was invited to the Ford Regional Dealer Convention in Marysville in 3 weeks. She's going with Terry Gilson and another colleague from their office, I said, pausing to gauge her reaction. No surprises. My sources have already informed me that this has been in development for a while. I guess she finally admitted it on Monday, Lydia replied calmly. On Monday. How did you know? I asked, intrigued. Well, that's my little secret. Let's just say Sheila isn't as smart as she thinks she is, Lydia chuckled. I think we should try to get some evidence. Can we use photos as evidence of adultery? I asked. Yes, absolutely. Since we now know that they rent the same hotel room every time, it shouldn't be too difficult. This week, my friend will collect photographic evidence that should strengthen our position. But that's not all, Lydia smiled slyly. I watched her satisfied smile and waited for the next piece of news. Century Ford is owned by Terry Gilson's father, Knox Gilson, as you probably know. I've heard from a reliable source that there's a morals clause in every employee's contract, which will make our supplementary lawsuit much easier. In fact, it's going to be a piece of cake, she said with a wicked smile. How much do you think we can get from them? I asked, my mean streak coming through. Well, we might get between $500,000 and $1 million, but of course we'll ask for much more. Terry's father can certainly afford it, she laughed. I really like the sound of this. I guess the only downside is the kids. I can protect Angie, but there's nothing I can do for Ben, I said, suddenly realizing how quickly things were moving. I know, and there's nothing I can do about it. Unless we get a judge who thinks Sheila is the worst, we'll just have to deal with it. I'm sorry. I wish it wasn't like this, she said with genuine pity. Okay, Lydia. Thanks for the groundwork. I'll let you know when and where the convention is and which hotel she's staying at, just in case your guy can't get anything between now and then. I was exhausted. This whole charade had drained me. I wanted to go home and sleep for a week or 3, just hoping it would all be over by then. I knew it wouldn't be, of course. There was still a long way to go. I managed to get through the next 3 weeks without raising any suspicion in Sheila. Perhaps she wasn't paying attention, or maybe she was so confident that she didn't worry about it. On the eve of her departure, she packed and moved her suitcase and travel tote to the front door, ready for her morning departure. She had no idea what awaited her that weekend. When I got up on Thursday morning at my usual time, Sheila was already up and having breakfast. She was clearly eager to leave and was nervously bustling around the kitchen. You're up early, I remarked coolly. Yes, I just wanted to make sure everything was taken care of before I left. Don't worry about it. Angie will handle the housework, and I'll help her over the weekend. I assume you'll be home Sunday morning, I suggested. I'm not sure if it will be morning or afternoon. I'll have to wait and see. It's Terry's car, so I'll let you know, she said hesitantly, avoiding my eyes. She knew what she was going to be doing and didn't want to face me or admit it to herself. She couldn't know there would be no escape from this weekend. Well, have a good time and behave yourself, I said with a hint of sarcasm. She gave me a brief glance and then continued with her clumsy activities. I couldn't recall seeing her this jittery before. Maybe she had sensed my change in attitude and was scared that I might know or suspect something. I couldn't be sure. I finished my coffee, kissed her lightly on the cheek, and left for the office. The thought of whether she suspected I knew something would nag at me all day. It could ruin my surprise, which would be very frustrating. I hadn't told Lydia or anyone else about my plans for early Sunday morning. When I arrived at the office, I called Lydia, who answered promptly. Lydia, can you confirm that we have photos of Gilson and Sheila together? I asked quickly. Yes, we have them. But I don't think you want to see them right now. Maybe after this is all over, but for now, let us handle it, okay? Her voice was subdued, unmistakably unhappy. I assumed the photos must be incriminating. The only positive was that it wouldn't matter if my little stunt on Sunday morning worked or not. The matter was already settled. Are the divorce papers ready? Yes, we can serve her whenever you say. I have a little surprise for her on Sunday morning, so I think we should serve her at her parents' house on Monday morning. Can I confirm that with you on Sunday? I asked. Yes, but Mick, you're not planning anything reckless, are you? She sounded worried. No, absolutely not. I won't do anything to mess this up, I promise. I hoped my assurance was comforting to this capable woman. I didn't want anything to ruin my plans. Good, I'm glad to hear that. Take care, Mick. I know these are tough times for you, but they will pass and you'll move on, she said sincerely. Lydia, I couldn't do this without your help. The hardest part left is telling the kids on Saturday. I'm not looking forward to that, I admitted. I'm sure you're not. Good luck. If you need anything, call me or David, okay? Thanks, I said, quietly hanging up the phone. I considered telling the kids that night, but decided against it. One of them might call their mother to warn her, and I wanted to avoid that risk. Sheila called around 8 o'clock that evening, sounding quite cheerful. She was enjoying the convention and all the different booths. Her room was nice, and the restaurant served excellent food. She spoke to me briefly before spending more time on the phone with Angie and Ben. She gave us her room number, 1228. After the kids went to bed at their usual time of 10 o'clock, I waited until I was sure they were asleep, then called the hotel and asked for room 1228. If Sheila answered, I planned to just wish her good night and say something pleasant. The phone rang 7 or 8 times, with no answer. I hung up. Sheila called again on Friday night at around the same time. We had another short conversation before she spoke to Angie and Ben. She sounded different this time. Maybe the excitement of the convention was fading, or perhaps it was something else. On Saturday, she called earlier than usual, just before 6. Fortunately, we were all home. Once again, our conversation was brief and not very personal. She mentioned she was going out to dinner with a large group and wouldn't be back until late. I wasn't upset. It made things easier for me. When Angie, Ben, and I sat down for dinner, the table was very quiet. We all seemed lost in our own thoughts. Finally, I knew I couldn't delay any longer. We cleared the table, put the dishes in the dishwasher, and I turned to both of them. Kids, I have some things I need to talk to you about, I began. Ben and Angie looked at me, and I sensed they had an idea of what this might be about. There's no easy way to say this, so I'm just going to tell you what's going to happen. I reached into my pocket and pulled out 2 shiny new house keys. These are your new keys to this house. The only other person who has one is me. Your mother will not be returning to our home, I finally forced myself to say. Angie gasped, and Ben's eyes widened as his mouth dropped open. Over the past year, your mother has been having an affair with her boss, Terry Gilson. She has betrayed me, you, and her marriage vows. I can no longer live with her, and I will not allow her in this house. I paused. Oh, Dad, oh no, Angie cried. Why did she do it? I don't know, but to be honest, it's not the most important thing on my mind right now. I know this is going to hurt you, I can't help it. She has been with Mr. Gilson at least twice a week for the last year. That's over 100 times. My anger was beginning to show, and I saw Ben cower slightly. This convention she's attending is just a cover so they can be together for the weekend. They're not fooling anyone, I spat. Dad, what's going to happen? Ben asked, still shocked by my statements. I have filed for divorce, and your mother will be served with the papers as soon as she gets back in town. There are other things that will happen to Mr. Gilson, but you don't need to worry about that right now. I'll let you know as they happen. I paused again. I'm sure my comments over the last 5 minutes must have left them reeling. Does this mean I'll never see Mom again? Ben asked, on the verge of tears. No, I wouldn't do that to you, Ben. I know how important she is to you, and I wouldn't do that. You'll probably be living with her to start with. When you're 18 like Angie, you'll be able to see both of us anytime you want. Angie, you can decide where you want to live. It will be your choice, I said, looking into my daughter's sad eyes. This sucks, Dad. It splits the family up. This sucks, she said through her tears. Yeah, I know. Unfortunately, it's the courts that make these decisions, not me. I really thought hard about this. I guess I could have told your mother what I knew and just continued with our lives. But I couldn't do that. I admit I'm very, very angry at your mother. She cheated us. She lied to us. I don't think I can just turn the other cheek, I confessed. Ben turned and quietly walked up the stairs to his room, closing the door behind him. He was in shock, I thought. I decided I would go up and sit with him in a bit, after he'd had some time to process what was happening. I turned to Angela, who looked at me sorrowfully, before stepping forward and hugging me. I'm so sorry, Dad. I know how much this must hurt. I can't believe she'd do this again, she cried. I pulled back and stared at my daughter. Again? Angie nodded, her eyes downcast. Tell me, please, I said softly. That was 4 years ago. I just started having red days, and I had some problems with them. One morning when I was in class, I started having severe cramps. I went to the nurse's office, and she sent me home with a note for my mom telling me what to buy. When I walked in the front door, I saw her looking at me. She and Mr. Morissette were sitting on the couch. Mom's underwear was lying on the floor. I probably screamed and ran upstairs to my room. I heard them talking and walking around the room, and then the door slammed. A few minutes later, Mom came into my room. At that moment, Angie couldn't stand it and burst into tears for real. What happened next? I had to wait patiently, allowing Angie to recount the events in her own way. Mom said that if I told you or anyone, you'd divorce her and I'd never see you again. She said courts always side with moms for custody, and that you'd be so mad at her that you'd probably move away and I wouldn't see you at all. She glanced up at me, shaking her head. I was terrified, Dad. I believed her. I couldn't bear to lose you. Not then. Not ever. I think I promised Mom I'd never tell anyone, except Ben until now. I wrapped my arm around her again and drew her close. That manipulative woman had exploited Angie's love for me and coerced her into silence. So Gilson wasn't the first or only one. I started to wonder how many others there might have been. How could I have been so blind? How did she manage this without me suspecting anything? Was I really that oblivious, or was she more cunning than I'd ever given her credit for? Angie, I don't know how else to express it except to say I love you. I promise to do everything in my power to be a good father, regardless of what the future holds. You're at an age where you can make your own decisions now, and I want you to know that whatever you choose, I'll stand by you. My love for you will never change. I didn't think there was anything else I could say, I admitted. Thank you, Dad. I believe you, and I want to stay here with you. You need someone, and I guess you're stuck with me, she said with a tearful smile. We hugged once more. I should probably go upstairs and talk to Ben. I'm sure he's going through a tough time too. You mentioned you told him about Mr. Morissette. Yes, about a month after it happened. Ben noticed Mom and I acting strange, and he said she seemed off, so I told him what I witnessed. How did he react? I inquired. Oddly enough, it didn't seem like a big shock to him. Maybe he suspected something already, Angie reflected. I thought he'd accuse me of lying, but he didn't say much at all. He just went quiet and kept it to himself. I nodded and stood up, heading towards the stairs and Ben's room. I gently knocked before turning the handle and pushing the door open cautiously. Ben was seated on his bed, staring blankly out at the window. It took him a moment to register my presence, but he remained silent. "I'm sorry, Ben. You know I never want to cause you harm. I hope you understand why I couldn't let things continue as they were," I said softly. He nodded and turned to face me. "I'm sorry too, Dad. Mom has hurt a lot of people, hasn't she?" he whispered. Yes, she has. I'm not sure what will happen next, but your grandparents will likely be upset," I replied. "Why, Dad? Why did she do it?" "I don't know, Ben. She never indicated she was unhappy or dissatisfied with her life." "Not once," I reiterated. "I hate her," he suddenly exclaimed. No, Ben, don't say that. She loves you, I'm certain of it. There's something else going on, something I don't understand." "Maybe she doesn't either. But don't let anger consume you. I know you love her. Perhaps with time you can forgive her. She would never want to hurt you or Angie," I reassured him as gently as I could. He looked crestfallen as he turned away. I placed my hand on his shoulder for reassurance. After a few moments, I stood up and quietly left his room, closing the door behind me. After waking up on Sunday morning, everything went haywire. Sheila tried calling the house, but I had already taken Angie and Ben out for breakfast to avoid her. We weren't particularly hungry, but leaving the house felt necessary. I turned off my phone and asked Angie to do the same to prevent Sheila from bothering her further. I informed the kids about the early morning call, and surprisingly, Angie laughed. Ben smiled in approval. Yet despite their support, I couldn't shake my unease. After breakfast, we drove to the park by the river and took a walk. Strangely, we all seemed to feel a bit better. Perhaps because the tension of what lay ahead had been temporarily relieved. Angie and Ben knew what was happening, and when it would happen. Personally, I couldn't shake the knot in my stomach. I had set in motion a process that would lead to the end of my marriage and break up our family. Today I had two important tasks: talking to my parents and calling Lydia to explain my actions. The thought of talking to George and Amy Pratt, Sheila's parents, filled me with dread. We were close, and they adored their grandchildren. I wasn't sure how they would react or whose side they would take. I decided to delay until Sheila made her move. Eventually, she would need somewhere to stay, and I suspected she would head home. I rang Lydia Pankratz first. I recounted my little stunt, and she too chuckled at my audacity. "Now that's a wake-up call I'd hate to receive," she chuckled. "I hope it felt good, Mick." "Not really. It was just petty revenge, I guess. But now she knows, and she understands some of the consequences," I replied, hearing a hint of anger in my voice. "And the kids, Mick. I talked to them last night, and I think they're handling it okay. They're not happy, of course, but they understand. We'll have to wait and see how it affects them long-term," I said. "But there's more." "What?" Lydia sounded surprised. "Angie told me she caught her mother with another man about 4 years ago. They were clearly in the middle of something. Sheila threatened Angie, saying she'd divorce me and cut her off from seeing me if she spoke up. She blackmailed her into silence," I finished. "My God, she would do that?" Lydia asked incredulously. "I thought I knew her. Clearly I didn't. She's not who I thought she was. She's one vindictive woman," I said, more regretful than angry. Lydia must have been wondering what would come next, I suppose. After a moment of silence, she spoke again. "Stick close to Angie and Ben, Mick. They'll need your support during this tough time. It's going to be rough on them for a while. Stick with them," she finished. "Thanks again for everything, Lydia. Once I find out where Sheila is, I'll update you so you can serve her." After we hung up, I closed my cell phone. Calling my parents was going to be a challenge. The call with my parents was short. I explained the situation, and their first concern was for Angie and Ben. I reassured them about my conversations with the kids last night and how they seemed okay today. That seemed to calm my mother, and both said they would talk to us later when things settled down. I wondered myself when that would be. I powered off my cell phone again. It had beeped to indicate a waiting call, likely from Sheila. I wasn't prepared to talk to her today. Angie, Ben, and I sat at a picnic bench in the park, and I explained that I didn't want to be near our house for a few hours. I expected their mother would rush home and try to get inside. When she found her key useless, she'd probably cause a scene. I suggested we take a drive in the countryside and stay away until well after dinner, then return. They agreed, and we discussed where to go. There was an outdoor fair in a small town a few miles south, so we decided to check it out. The fair provided a delightful diversion for us. We indulged in hot dogs to tide us over until dinner and thoroughly enjoyed ourselves at a traditional country fair. It helped take our minds off our troubles and allowed us to focus on something else. We didn't return to town until almost 7 o'clock, where we stopped at a pleasant restaurant for dinner. We were aware that eventually we would need to confront the changes in our lives. But for that final day, we could evade all of that and find a moment of tranquility. We arrived home close to 9 o'clock. Sheila was nowhere to be seen and the house was dark. After parking the car in the garage, we turned on the lights as we entered. Everything appeared unchanged since we had left for breakfast that morning. The children retired to their room to prepare for bed. I turned on the TV but found nothing captivating, so I too decided to call it a night. Restlessness plagued me as I pondered what the next day would bring. I anticipated fallout from my phone call and the delivery of divorce papers. It was only a matter of time. On Monday morning, I plugged the phones back in. I hadn't expected Sheila to call so early, but I was mistaken. The phone rang almost immediately. Without caller ID, I answered cautiously. "Hello?" I greeted. Mick, please, we need to talk," came Sheila's voice. "What is there to talk about?" I replied quietly, mindful of the children. "Oh God, Mick, you know what? I can explain. It's not what you think," she pleaded. "That's the second time you've said that." "What exactly do you think I think?" I challenged. "Unlike an affair, it was just a foolish mistake. Please don't let our marriage end because of this," she pleaded. "You must think I'm the biggest fool alive, Sheila. I know you've been seeing that jerk Gilson for at least a year. And now I find out Francis Morissette is also on your list. We have photos and all the evidence we need. This is going to get messy, Sheila, and it's all on you. It's going to get ugly. I promise you that." With that, I hung up the phone and disconnected it again. I went to work and told Larry Coleman I was filing for divorce. I asked him not to put through any calls from my wife if she rang. He agreed and went straight to Gloria at the switchboard to let her know. Back in my office, I tried to bury myself in paperwork. I managed to focus until around 11 that morning when my phone rang. It was George Pratt, my father-in-law. "Good morning, George. I can guess why you're calling." "I'm sorry for not giving you and Amy a heads up," I said, trying to get ahead of the conversation. "I think I understand, but I need to hear it from you, Mick. You've always been honest with me, so tell me what the hell happened," he asked directly. I informed Sheila's father, George, about my concerns regarding Gilson, how I found out about her affair with him, and the shocking discovery of her other involvement with Morissette. After detailing her actions, there was a long pause on the line. "My God," he eventually whispered, his voice subdued. "I never thought she was capable of such things." "Are you absolutely certain about this, Mick?" he asked, desperately seeking reassurance. "I'm sorry, George, I wish I wasn't, but I have photographic evidence," I replied, feeling sympathy for him. He deserved better from his daughter. "For now, she's staying with me, Mick." "Do you plan to file for divorce?" he inquired. "Yes. The paperwork is ready. She'll be served either at her workplace or... Well, I'm sorry, but it might happen at your place." I apologized. "I understand. This will not only hurt her, but also devastate her mother. I know it's not your fault, but... well, never mind." "I hope we can still see the grandchildren, Mick," he said with a glimmer of hope. "Absolutely, George. This is not about you or Amy. I would never keep you or the kids away. You're always welcome here, I assured him sincerely. Thank you, Mick, I'm sorry. But thank you, he said sadly before hanging up. Replacing the phone, I felt emotionally drained. I knew there would be more moments like this in the weeks and months ahead. I needed to prepare myself for what was to come. I discovered that Sheila had gone to work that morning and, surprisingly, still had a job. Gilson hadn't realized that consequences might catch up with him, so he carried on as usual. When Lydia confirmed my wife had arrived at work on time, she sent a process server immediately. Before she had even had her morning coffee, divorce papers were in Sheila's hands. Witnesses reported she broke down immediately and fled the building, likely to her parents' home. But the real drama began shortly after when Terry Gilson and Knox Gilson were served legal notices. These stated my intention to sue for damages, citing alienation of affection and corporate negligence in enforcing morality clauses in certain employees' contracts. The claims sought $5 million in punitive and compensatory damages. And so the spectacle began. Later, I learned Knox Gilson had a serious confrontation with his son Terry, cutting him off completely. No more cushy jobs, no more rescues from irate husbands. If Terry didn't straighten up, he'd lose his inheritance too. Knox had indulged his son for over 20 years, but had finally reached his limit. The grown man-child would have to fend for himself sooner or later. Terry did what was entirely predictable and promptly went out and got drunk. With nowhere else to go after being kicked out of the dealership, he retreated to his townhouse, disappearing into isolation for several days. I anticipated that legal proceedings would move slowly. Sheila, foolishly, chose to contest the divorce until Lydia's lawyer presented the evidence we had, including photographs. That swiftly quashed Sheila's resistance. Lydia would try to minimize my financial losses, but she could end up with half of everything as her reward for betrayal. The week crawled by painfully. Though I went to work, my mind wasn't on it. Larry was understanding, but I couldn't expect his patience to last indefinitely. I had to start planning for my future as a single man and sole parent, which seemed overwhelming. On Saturday, while cutting the backyard lawn, I heard a disturbance in the driveway. A car door slammed, followed by urgent knocking on my front door. Angie and Ben weren't home, so I walked around the house and encountered Terry Gilson. He looked like he'd been through a brutal ordeal. His disheveled appearance and troubled expression warned me that something terrible had happened. That was the last thing I remembered before he struck me hard with his right fist. The next thing I remembered was regaining consciousness in the hospital. It wasn't a sudden awakening, but rather a gradual return to awareness. I was lying flat on my back, feeling a dull pain from my head down to my groin. It took more than a day for me to start becoming fully alert. I drifted in and out of consciousness, grasping fleeting moments of the present. At some point, I became aware that someone was by my side. I could sense their presence, but I couldn't bring myself to open my eyes. Or maybe I simply didn't want to. My head felt heavy, like two marbles rolling around in a tin can. I heard a familiar voice speaking, but couldn't connect it to a memory to identify who it might be. I struggled to recall what had landed me here, and eventually I remembered Gilson's face and the blow from his fist. A day later, I learned that my mother and Angie had hardly left my side during my time in the ICU. I tried to smile at them, though it was painful, hoping they knew how grateful I was for their presence. I vaguely heard Angie mention that Ben would visit after school, and I attempted another smile, despite the discomfort it caused. It took more than a week before I was lucid enough to speak with my doctor. He began at the beginning. I had a concussion from hitting the wooden frame of my garage door during the altercation with Gilson. My right shoulder was dislocated with severe bruising in the upper arm. I had 3, possibly 4 cracked ribs. There was extensive bruising on my kidneys and other internal organs. My testicles were badly swollen, with concerns about potential damage. Finally, they had to remove my spleen because it had ruptured. My injuries resulted from a single punch from an enraged Terry Gilson, followed by him kicking me systematically while I lay unconscious on the ground. Felicia Romano saved me. She witnessed most of the attack and screamed loudly from her kitchen window, causing Gilson to notice he was being watched. He hurried back to his car, reversed out of our driveway, and sped away recklessly down the street. Felicia immediately called 911, which led to me being taken to the hospital. Gilson was identified by both Felicia and another neighbor who noted his license plate as he sped away, narrowly avoiding hitting a mother with a stroller. There aren't many 1964 white Ford Galaxy convertibles in our town, so it didn't take long for Gilson to be spotted leaving a bar in a hasty manner. In a fitting conclusion, Gilson was arrested for DUI and resisting arrest. His troubles didn't end there. In the holding cell, they connected Felicia Romano's assault report with my hospital admission. After questioning Felicia, Gilson was charged with aggravated assault, assault with intent, and criminal trespass. Justice caught up with him. When Gilson tried to call his father from jail, Knox Gilson refused to speak with him. I wish I could have witnessed that, but I was unconscious and undergoing surgery to remove my spleen. 2 days after I regained consciousness, a plainclothes officer visited me for a statement. I recounted what I could remember, mainly an angry face and a powerful punch. When asked about the motive for the assault, I shared details of Terry's actions involving my wife, our divorce, and the ensuing legal battles. The officer nodded understandingly and thanked me before leaving. The divorce settlement was harsh on Sheila. I'll be purchasing her share of our home. She received the bare minimum and no alimony, along with a stern lecture about her role in my injuries. Knox had fired both Terry and Sheila. She was job hunting when our divorce was finalized. Her reputation suffered in certain circles, leaving me uncertain if she'd secure decent work in town. Ben lives with Sheila now, though Angie suggests their relationship isn't as strong as it once was. I see Ben on weekends. Thankfully, the judge was lenient on that front. He seems resilient, but he's not the same kid I remember from happier times. Angie is my rock, keeping me on track. She manages the household, my diet and exercise routine. It's almost like having a second mother. My parents have been unwavering support during this time. Their presence has been invaluable lately. I couldn't handle more pressure. George and Amy remain supportive friends, though disappointed in Sheila. She's their only child, so they feel compelled to stand by her. Ben's presence is a comfort to them, and they spoil him in some ways, which I'm okay with. My main concern is Ben's well-being through all of this. Angie visits them occasionally. Her relationship with her mother seems strained from what I gather, but they are speaking again. The legal cases won't go to court, according to my lawyer friends Dave and Lydia. Knox Gilson will ensure they settle for a substantial amount, securing my financial future for years, despite taxes and legal fees. I'm already planning to support Angie and Ben's college education and get them a car. At least some good will come out of this messy situation. Physically, I've recovered as much as possible. While I lost my spleen, my kidneys, ribs, and shoulder have mostly healed. I'm undergoing physiotherapy 3 times a week and will continue for a while. I still experience daily aches and pains that vary in intensity. My doctor estimates my testicles are about 80% functional, though I haven't tested them yet. I'm not particularly interested in pursuing relationships at the moment. Once the money from the settlement arrives, I plan to buy something very special for Jimmy and Felicia. Jimmy supported me when I needed him, and Felicia likely saved my life. I want to show them my immense gratitude with something truly extravagant. I often wonder what lies ahead. Sheila's actions still deeply affect me, but I believe with time, I'll heal from the worst of it. I tried to resign from Polar Industries, but Larry insisted I take an indefinite leave instead. Soon I'll come into a substantial sum of money, and I've been contemplating how to best use it. I think I've found my answer. One of my longtime clients and a friend from my early days in sales, Frank Clay, wants to retire and sell his building supply business. It's a solid enterprise with a good mix of retail and construction customers, supported by the Build Right buying group to compete against larger stores. Dave Mornay and I plan to discuss the possibility with Frank. When Ben heard about my plans, he immediately expressed interest in working weekends and summers. Keeping him close is a no-brainer for me. I want to ensure he's well supported during these challenging teenage years, especially with the family dynamics we're navigating. Looking at Knox and Terry Gilson, I see the consequences of not being closely involved with your children. I've had ample time to reflect on what happened to me and our family. I'll admit I took it personally and sought full revenge. That feeling hasn't changed. If it had only been Gilson I had to confront, things might have been different. I can understand how he could charm someone like Sheila. However, discovering Morissette's blackmailing of our daughter erased any thoughts of mercy. Dave mentioned Terry will serve 2 to 4 years for his attack on me. We discussed a civil lawsuit, but there's nothing left to recover. His father disowned him. He's unemployed with no prospects. When he gets out at 50, his future looks bleak. There's no further way to harm him. Surprisingly, Knox Gilson visited during my rehabilitation. He apologized for everything, including his son's actions. I accepted his apology as sincere. He clearly understood the emotional toll alongside the physical damage. We shook hands and my opinion of Mr. Gilson Sr. improved a bit. So, that's the story. A tragic one, no doubt. I once believed I had a perfect family. Looking back, I can recall our happy times or dwell on anger. Maybe one day I'll focus on the former. For now, I'm still coping with the latter.